I never thought a simple comment about mashed potatoes would shatter my world. Sitting at my childhood dining room table last Sunday, surrounded by the familiar scent of Mom's roast chicken and the gentle clinking of silverware against china, I felt genuinely happy for the first time in months. The warm glow of the overhead chandelier cast everything in golden light as I reached for seconds, completely unaware that my brother Derek was about to deliver the most devastating blow of my life. When I casually mentioned how excited I was about our upcoming family reunion, Derek's cold laughter cut through the comfortable dinner conversation like a blade through silk. His words still echo in my mind with brutal clarity. The silence that followed Derek's announcement felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane. My fork stayed suspended halfway to my mouth as his words registered fully. "You're not invited. It's for real family." The casual cruelty in his voice made my stomach drop, like I'd just fallen off a cliff. Mom continued cutting her chicken without looking up. Dad kept chewing methodically, his eyes focused on his plate, as if it held the secrets of the universe. Shannon, Derek's wife, actually giggled behind her napkin, like we were sharing some inside joke. I set my fork down carefully, the small metallic sound seeming unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. 28 years of family dinners of being the responsible son who never missed a birthday or holiday, and this was how they saw me. Not real family. The phrase burned in my chest like acid. Nobody defended me. Nobody said Derek was being ridiculous or cruel. They just let his words hang in the air like a noose, waiting for my reaction. I could feel my face burning with humiliation, but I forced myself to smile. That smile probably saved my dignity, even though it felt like swallowing broken glass. "Well, that's interesting." I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady. I pushed back from the table, the chair legs scraping against the hardwood floor that Dad and I had refinished together 3 summers ago. "Thanks for dinner, Mom." I walked to the front door with measured steps, grabbed my jacket from the coat closet, and stepped out into the cool October evening. Behind me, conversation resumed as if nothing had happened. Derek's booming laughter drifted through the closed door, probably telling some story about his latest construction project, while I stood on the porch, where I'd taken countless family photos over the years. The drive home to my downtown apartment took 23 minutes, but it felt like crossing an entire continent. Streetlights blurred past my windshield as I replayed every family gathering from the past few years, searching for signs I'd somehow missed. When had I become the outsider? When had Derek convinced everyone I didn't belong? Back in my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop staring at the blue glow of the screen. Something Derek said kept nagging at me. Real family. What exactly did that mean? I opened my banking app, something I rarely did outside of work hours, and began scrolling through my transaction history. The numbers told a story I'd been too blind to see. 3 years and 4 months ago, Dad's pickup truck broke down. I'd transferred $4,200 for repairs without hesitation. 2 years ago, Mom's insurance didn't fully cover her hospital stay after her gallbladder surgery. $8,900 gone in a single transfer. When Derek's contracting business nearly went under 18 months ago, I'd quietly covered his business loan payments. $15,600 over 6 months, never asking for repayment or even acknowledgement. Shannon's sister's wedding last spring. $3,800 for flowers when the original florist canceled last minute. Derek had called it a family emergency, said they'd pay me back after tax season. Tax season came and went without a word. I totaled the numbers 3 times, each calculation hitting me harder than the last. $32,500 in 3 years. More money than some people made in a year flowing from my account to solve family problems that somehow never got solved any other way. But according to Derek, I wasn't real family. My phone buzzed with a text notification. My cousin Marcus, Derek's age, but infinitely kinder, had sent a message that made my blood freeze. "Hey Blair, can't wait to see you at the reunion next weekend. Dad's been talking about your presentation about Grandpa's military service all month." He's so proud that you volunteered to speak." I read the message 4 times before its full meaning sank in. Uncle Tom, Dad's older brother, who'd always treated me like his own son, was expecting me at the reunion. He was proud of me for volunteering to honor our grandfather's Purple Heart service with a memorial presentation. Derek had lied. The reunion was happening. I was supposed to be a featured speaker, and Derek had convinced everyone I was too busy or too good to participate. My hands shook as I scrolled through more bank records this time, looking for something specific. There it was, buried in my business account notifications. 3 months ago, I'd been added as the primary account holder on something called Harrison Family Business Account. I'd signed the paperwork during one of Dad's visits to my office, thinking it was just insurance paperwork or estate planning documents. But this account had been receiving my quarterly estimated tax payments automatically since I'd updated my business banking information. $12,400 had been deposited over the past 3 months. Money that was supposed to be set aside for my tax obligations had instead been flowing into a family account I didn't even know existed. I called the bank's 24-hour customer service line, my heart hammering as I waded through the automated menu. When a representative finally answered, her voice professional and patient, I asked about recent withdrawals from the Harrison Family Business Account. The most recent activity shows attempted withdrawals totaling $11,700 over the past 2 months, she explained. All for event planning services, catering deposits, and venue rentals. The transactions were authorized by someone named Derek Harrison, listed as a secondary account holder. Derek had been planning the family reunion using my money while telling everyone I didn't want to participate. He'd positioned himself as the generous brother, taking care of family business, while literally stealing my funds to pay for it. The financial discovery was devastating enough, but the emotional manipulation cut deeper than any monetary loss. I spent the rest of the night documenting everything. Screenshots of transfers, saved text messages, asking for emergency help, voicemails from Dad, thanking me for being understanding about temporary loans that were never repaid. The evidence painted a clear picture of systematic financial exploitation, disguised as family support. By dawn, I understood Derek's game completely. He'd been building his reputation as the responsible, caring son, while using my money to fund his generosity. Every time he'd helped the family financially, every time he'd swooped in to save the day, it had been my bank account providing the heroics. And now he was planning the ultimate betrayal, excluding me from a reunion I was unknowingly financing while taking credit for organizing the whole event. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the realization that my entire family had been fed a carefully constructed narrative about who I was and what I meant to them. Derek hadn't just stolen my money. He'd stolen my identity as the dependable son, the one who took care of everyone, the one who could be counted on when things got tough. But he'd made one crucial mistake. By trying to exclude me from the reunion while using my money to pay for it, he'd given me leverage I never knew I had. And unlike Derek, I'd never learned how to be cruel just for the sake of cruelty. I was about to get a very expensive education in family dynamics. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually made me grateful to be alive. Instead, I sat in my office chair, phone in hand, about to have the most important conversation of my adult life. Uncle Tom answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Blair, what a pleasant surprise. I was just thinking about you. Are you getting excited about Saturday?" "Uncle Tom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. What exactly did Derek tell you about my involvement in the reunion planning?" The pause on the other end of the line stretched long enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. When Uncle Tom finally spoke, his voice carried a note of confusion that confirmed my worst suspicions. "Well, son, Derek mentioned you were swamped with work projects and couldn't commit to the planning committee. He said you felt bad about being so busy, but that you'd try to make it if your schedule cleared up. He's been handling all the coordination with such dedication. I have to admit, I was a little surprised you couldn't make time for something this important. But Derek assured me you were just overwhelmed. The careful politeness in Uncle Tom's voice told me everything I needed to know. Derek had poisoned the well so thoroughly that even my favorite uncle had started questioning my commitment to family. The man who'd taught me to fish, who'd taken me camping every summer until I turned 16, who'd been at my high school graduation, cheering louder than my own parents, had been convinced I'd outgrown my family responsibilities. Uncle Tom, what if I told you I never said any of those things to Derek? What if I told you I've been looking forward to this reunion for months, and specifically asked Derek to let me coordinate Grandpa's memorial presentation? Another long pause. I could practically hear Uncle Tom's mind working, connecting dots that Derek had kept carefully separated. Son, that doesn't make sense. Derek's been coordinating everything through the family business account. He said you'd set it up to make planning easier, but that you were too busy to be actively involved. He's been sending updates to everyone about deposits and payments. My stomach twisted into a knot. Uncle Tom, can you tell me exactly how much money has been spent so far? Oh, Derek's been so responsible about keeping costs down. Let me see, he sent the last financial update 3 days ago. Venue rental was $4,000, catering for 60 people came to $5,800, and the overnight accommodations for out-of-town family were $2,600. Derek insisted on covering the incidentals himself, said the family account shouldn't be burdened with small expenses. I did the math quickly. $12,400. Exactly the amount that had been automatically deposited from my business account over the past 3 months. Derek hadn't contributed a single penny of his own money, but he'd positioned himself as the generous family benefactor who insisted on covering extras out of pocket. Uncle Tom, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to believe it at first. I spent the next 45 minutes explaining the entire situation. The automatic deposits, the family business account, I'd unknowingly funded Derek's systematic exclusion of me from an event I was paying for. Uncle Tom listened without interruption, asking only clarifying questions that showed he was taking every word seriously. Blair, this is devastating. Your grandfather would be spinning in his grave if he knew one of his grandsons was manipulating family like this. Derek specifically told me you'd gotten too successful for family gatherings, that you'd mentioned feeling like the reunions were beneath your current lifestyle. Each revelation hit like a physical blow. Derek hadn't just excluded me from one dinner conversation. He'd been conducting a months-long campaign to isolate me from the entire extended family. Every cousin, aunt, and uncle had received a carefully crafted version of events that painted me as the arrogant, successful nephew who'd outgrown his humble family roots. There's more, isn't there? Uncle Tom's voice carried the weight of dawning realization. What else has Derek been telling people? I took a deep breath before continuing. I need to ask some questions about family finances over the past few years. Have you, or any other family members, contributed money to help with my parents' expenses? Oh, Blair. Uncle Tom's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Derek organized a collection last Christmas. He said your business was struggling because of the economy, and that you were too proud to ask for help. He said your parents were worried about you, but didn't want to add to your stress by asking for financial support. We raised almost $3,000. The room started spinning. Derek had collected money from extended family under the pretense of helping me during financial difficulties, all while I was quietly funding every family emergency that arose. I'd been paying for my own charity case, while being painted as too proud to accept help. Uncle Tom, my business has never been stronger. Last year was my most profitable year ever. I've been the one helping Mom and Dad with medical bills and emergency repairs for the past 3 years. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear Uncle Tom breathing heavily, processing the full scope of Derek's deception. Son, I need to make some phone calls. Can you send me documentation of what you've told me? Because if you're right, Derek hasn't just lied to us. He's committed fraud. After hanging up with Uncle Tom, I spent the rest of the day reaching out to other family members, carefully probing for information without revealing my hand completely. The picture that emerged was even worse than I'd imagined. Cousin Sarah mentioned how sad she'd been when Derek told her I'd stopped returning calls from elderly relatives because I was too busy with important clients. Cousin Mike remembered Derek explaining that I'd developed expensive tastes and felt uncomfortable at casual family gatherings. Aunt Linda had been told I'd made comments about the family being small town compared to my new social circle. Each conversation revealed another layer of Derek's systematic character assassination. He'd taken every generous gesture I'd made, every success I'd achieved, every moment of personal growth, and twisted it into evidence of arrogance and abandonment. He'd painted me as the prodigal son who'd forgotten his roots, while simultaneously positioning himself as the humble, loyal family man who stayed true to his values. But the most devastating discovery came during a call with my cousin, Jennifer, Uncle Tom's daughter. She mentioned something that made my blood run cold. I was so confused when Derek said you didn't want to do Grandpa's memorial presentation anymore. You'd been working on it for months. Remember, you spent all that time at the Veterans Administration office getting copies of his service records. You even tracked down that old photo of his unit in France. Derek hadn't just excluded me from the reunion. He'd stolen my memorial presentation for our grandfather, the Purple Heart recipient, who'd raised Dad and Uncle Tom after their parents died in a car accident. I'd spent dozens of hours researching Grandpa's military service, interviewing elderly veterans who'd known him, scanning faded photographs, and preparing a tribute that would honor his memory properly. Derek had taken even that away from me. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, I had a comprehensive understanding of Derek's 3-year manipulation campaign. He'd systematically isolated me from family relationships while exploiting my financial resources. He'd convinced everyone that success had made me arrogant while taking credit for generosity funded by my bank account. He'd stolen my memorial presentation for our grandfather while positioning himself as the family patriarch who truly understood the value of heritage and tradition. The manipulation was so thorough, so carefully constructed, that even I'd started questioning myself. Maybe I had been too focused on work. Maybe I had been taking family for granted. Derek's lies were so convincing because they contained just enough truth to seem plausible. But facts were facts. Bank records didn't lie. Phone logs didn't manipulate the truth. Financial statements couldn't be gaslit into saying something they didn't mean. Derek had underestimated one crucial thing about me. I'd built a successful tech consulting business by being methodical, thorough, and absolutely committed to getting the details right. When I investigated a problem, I didn't stop until I understood every component completely. Derek was about to discover that the quiet, generous brother he'd been exploiting had developed some very sharp analytical skills over the years. And unlike him, I'd never needed to lie or manipulate to get what I wanted. I was about to prove that truth and careful documentation were far more powerful than charisma and family politics. Thursday morning arrived with an email notification that made me smile for the first time in days. Account alert: withdrawal attempt of $2,700 denied due to insufficient authorization. Derek had tried to access the family business account for what I assumed were final reunion expenses, but I'd contacted the bank on Tuesday and implemented additional security protocols. My phone rang exactly 17 minutes later. Dad's name appeared on the screen, and I could hear the confusion in his voice before he even finished saying hello. Blair. I'm getting some kind of error message from the bank about our family account. Derek said you might have accidentally changed something with the business setup. The careful phrasing told me Derek was coaching this conversation. Dad never spoke about banking with that kind of formal language. Derek had clearly briefed him on what to say, probably standing right there during the call. Dad, what specific withdrawal was Derek trying to make? Well, son, he was just covering the final expenses for the reunion. You know how responsible he's been about managing everything. Something about catering deposits and transportation costs. I closed my eyes, imagining Derek frantically trying to access money that wasn't his to cover commitments he'd made using funds I'd provided. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. Derek had built his entire family reputation on financial reliability, but he'd never actually risked his own money for any of his generous gestures. Dad, can you put Derek on the phone? I'd like to discuss this with him directly. Oh, he's not here right now. He had to run to a job site. Some kind of emergency with a foundation pour. Derek was avoiding me. The man who'd confidently humiliated me at Sunday dinner was now hiding behind Dad, probably calculating how to spin this new development to his advantage. Dad, there's something important I need to discuss with you about family finances. Can we meet for coffee tomorrow morning? Just the two of us. Is everything all right, son? Derek mentioned you might be having some stress with work pressures. He said the tech industry has been volatile lately. Another Derek narrative. Even my own father was receiving filtered information about my life, carefully crafted, to support whatever story Derek was telling that week. I wondered how many other conversations had been shaped by Derek's interpretations of my thoughts, feelings, and circumstances. Dad, my business has never been stronger. I think there might be some miscommunication happening here. Can we talk in person? We arranged to meet at Frank's Diner, the same place Dad had taken me for breakfast every Saturday morning when I was in elementary school. After hanging up, I spent 20 minutes staring out my office window, watching afternoon traffic, and thinking about manipulation techniques that were so subtle, they were almost artistic. Derek had positioned himself as my interpreter, to the family filtering every interaction through his own agenda. When I helped with medical bills, Derek framed it as business tax strategies. When I missed family gatherings due to work commitments, Derek explained it as growing arrogance. When I succeeded professionally, Derek translated it as forgetting my roots. He'd become the family communications hub controlling information flow in both directions. I wondered how many of my own words had been twisted or outright fabricated in conversations I'd never had. My computer pinged with another email notification, this one from the reunion venue coordinator. Mr. Harrison, we're confirming the final payment schedule discussed with Derek Harrison yesterday. However, since you're listed as the primary contact and payment source, we wanted to verify the changes to Saturday's program. Specifically, the removal of the military memorial presentation and the addition of the Harrison Family Business Success Story presentation. Could you confirm these modifications are correct? I read the email 3 times before its implications fully registered. Derek hadn't just stolen my memorial presentation for Grandpa. He'd replaced it with a presentation about Harrison family business success, undoubtedly featuring himself as the protagonist of our family's entrepreneurial achievements. The audacity was breathtaking. Derek was planning to stand in front of 60 family members, using my money to fund an event I was excluded from delivering a presentation about business success, while stealing credit for my financial contributions, all in place of a memorial for the grandfather, who'd specifically asked me to honor his military service. I called the venue, immediately speaking with Lisa, the event coordinator who'd handled our booking. Mr. Harrison, thank you for calling back so quickly. We were confused about the program changes because your original presentation proposal was so well-researched and moving. We actually shared it with our other clients as an example of how to properly honor military veterans at family events. Lisa, I need you to understand something very clearly. I did not authorize any changes to Saturday's program. The military memorial presentation should remain exactly as originally planned. Derek Harrison does not have authority to modify the event programming. Oh my, this is awkward. Derek mentioned there had been some family disagreements about the memorial, and that you'd decided military topics were too controversial for a family reunion. He said the business success presentation would be more unifying and celebratory. Derek had anticipated that I might try to reclaim my presentation, so he'd preemptively poisoned that well too. He'd made it seem like I was the one causing family drama by insisting on military content that made people uncomfortable. Lisa, my grandfather, was a Purple Heart recipient who served in World War II. The memorial presentation includes interviews with surviving veterans who served with him, rare photographs from his unit, and documentation of his service that took months to compile. There is nothing controversial about honoring a decorated veteran at a family reunion. Mr. Harrison, I'm so sorry. Derek presented this very differently. He said you'd become fixated on military history and were planning something too somber for a celebration. He showed us an outline for a presentation about family business growth that seemed much more appropriate for the occasion. I spent 15 minutes explaining the real situation to Lisa, who became increasingly uncomfortable as she realized she'd been manipulated into participating in Derek's elaborate deception. She agreed to restore the original programming and promised to contact me directly for any future modifications. After ending that call, I sat in my office chair feeling like I'd been physically beaten. Derek's manipulation was so comprehensive, so carefully planned, that he'd even anticipated and countered moves I hadn't thought to make yet. He turned my memorial presentation for Grandpa into evidence of my psychological instability, my financial success into proof of my arrogance, and my generous nature into a weapon against my own family relationships. But Derek had made a crucial miscalculation. He'd assumed I would react emotionally, that I'd get angry, and lash out in ways that would validate his narrative about my character. He'd built his entire strategy around the assumption that success had made me soft, that I'd lost the toughness that came from growing up in a working-class family. Derek had forgotten that the tech industry was just as cutthroat as construction work, just with better benefits and cleaner fingernails. He'd forgotten that building a business from nothing required the same determination and strategic thinking that he used on job sites, just applied to different problems. Most importantly, Derek had forgotten that I'd learned my work ethic and problem-solving skills from the same man he had. Dad hadn't raised quitters or victims. He'd raised sons who finished what they started and who didn't back down from bullies, even when the bullies shared their last name. Derek wanted to play family politics and financial manipulation. Fine. But he'd picked the wrong brother to underestimate, and he was about to discover that quiet people often make the loudest noise when they finally decide to speak up. The withdrawal attempt had failed, but Derek's real education was just beginning. Friday afternoon, I sent Derek the screenshot that would change everything. The image showed his denied withdrawal attempt, along with a detailed breakdown of every transaction from the family business account over the past 3 months. Below the financial data, I'd added a simple message: payment denied. Must be that family-only policy. Then I attached a comprehensive spreadsheet showing 3 years of my financial support to the family cross, referenced with Derek's claims of personal generosity during the same period. Every emergency loan, every medical bill, every business bailout was documented with dates, amounts, and Derek's public statements taking credit for the assistance. I hit send at exactly 3:37 in the afternoon and turned off my phone. Derek lasted 11 minutes before the callback started. By 4:15, I had 17 missed calls, 12 voicemails, and 23 text messages ranging from desperate pleading to furious threats. I listened to the voicemails in chronological order, watching Derek's emotional state deteriorate in real time. Blair, we need to talk about this misunderstanding immediately. Call me back. Blair, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but you're embarrassing the entire family. Fix this now. You're being incredibly selfish and vindictive. The reunion is tomorrow, and you're going to destroy everything over some petty grudge. Fine. You want to be childish about this. Two can play that game. Don't expect any help when your business fails and you come crawling back to family. The progression from confusion to panic to rage told me everything about Derek's true character. When his manipulation tactics stopped working, when he couldn't control the narrative anymore, he revealed the ugly anger that had been hiding beneath his charismatic surface all along. My phone started ringing again. This time it was Shannon, Derek's wife, her voice artificially sweet with the kind of false concern that made my skin crawl. Blair, honey, Derek is so upset about this misunderstanding. He's been working so hard to make the reunion special for everyone, and he feels like you're trying to sabotage something beautiful. Can't you two just work this out like brothers? Shannon, what exactly did Derek tell you about the family business account? Well, he said you'd set it up to help with family expenses, but that you'd gotten overwhelmed with work and asked him to handle the details. He's been so responsible about managing everything while you focused on your career. And where did Derek tell you the money for the reunion was coming from? Oh, Derek's been saving for months. He took on extra contracting jobs and even borrowed against our house equity to make sure the family had a perfect celebration. He said money wasn't important when it came to bringing family together. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Derek had convinced his own wife that he'd mortgaged their home to fund a reunion that was actually being paid for by my business account. Shannon genuinely believed she was married to a financially heroic man who sacrificed for family, while Derek was actually risking nothing except other people's money. Shannon Derek hasn't contributed a single dollar to reunion expenses. Every penny has come from my business account without my knowledge or permission. He's been lying to you about the source of the funding. The silence stretched long enough for me to wonder if the call had disconnected. When Shannon finally spoke, her voice carried a note of uncertainty that suggested cracks were appearing in Derek's carefully constructed narrative. That doesn't make sense, Blair. Derek showed me bank statements and receipts. He's been handling all the coordination and payments personally. Did Derek show you statements from his personal accounts or from the family business account? Another pause. I assumed they were the same thing. Derek handles our finances. I realized Shannon was as much a victim of Derek's manipulation as the rest of us. She'd been living with a man who presented himself as financially generous while secretly risking their actual security and stealing from his own brother. Her entire understanding of her husband's character was based on lies that were about to collapse spectacularly. My phone buzzed with a text from Uncle Tom. Blair, I've been making calls all afternoon. We need to have a family meeting before the reunion. Some things Derek told us about you don't match what other family members remember. Can you come to my house at 7 tonight? The investigation was expanding beyond my control, which was exactly what I'd hoped would happen. Uncle Tom wasn't just questioning Derek's recent claims. He was reviewing years of conversations and starting to notice inconsistencies in stories that had seemed plausible when heard individually, but became obviously false when examined together. Derek called again at 6:45, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Blair, Uncle Tom is asking questions I can't answer. You need to stop this before it gets out of hand. Whatever you think I did wrong, we can fix it privately. Derek, what exactly do you think you did wrong? I may have exaggerated some things about your involvement in family finances, but everything I did was to protect your reputation and keep family harmony. You were so busy with work, I thought it would be easier if I handled the coordination. Even cornered and desperate, Derek couldn't bring himself to admit the full scope of his deception. He was still trying to frame his manipulation as protective rather than predatory, still positioning himself as the thoughtful brother who'd been managing difficult situations on my behalf. Derek, you told Uncle Tom my business was failing and collected money from extended family to help me financially. You've been stealing my identity as the family's financial supporter while taking credit for generosity funded by my bank account. You excluded me from a reunion I'm paying for while telling everyone I thought I was too good for family gatherings. That's not protection. That's systematic fraud. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. The construction business is brutal right now. I was just trying to keep everyone happy while dealing with my own problems. There it was. The real motive behind 3 years of manipulation. Derek's business was struggling, his finances were precarious, and he'd been using my success to maintain an image of stability he couldn't actually afford. Instead of asking for help directly, he'd constructed an elaborate deception that let him access my resources while positioning himself as the successful brother who had everything under control. Derek, if you needed financial help, why didn't you just ask me? I would have helped you without question. Because I'm not supposed to be the one who needs help. I'm the older brother. I'm supposed to be the one taking care of family, not getting handouts from my younger brother who works on computers all day. The honesty in that admission was more revealing than all of Derek's lies combined. His manipulation wasn't just about money. It was about pride, about maintaining an identity that reality couldn't support, about refusing to acknowledge that the little brother he'd always seen as soft and impractical had become more successful than the strong, practical older brother who worked with his hands. Derek had destroyed family relationships and committed financial fraud rather than admit he needed help from someone he'd always considered inferior. The tragedy wasn't just what he'd done to me. It was what his pride had cost him in terms of integrity, relationships, and self-respect. But understanding Derek's motivations didn't excuse his actions or reduce their consequences. Tomorrow's reunion would reveal the full scope of his deception to the entire extended family. The financial fraud was documented and undeniable. The character assassination campaign was about to backfire spectacularly. Derek had one last chance to control the narrative, but only if he was willing to admit the truth and ask for forgiveness. Based on his desperate phone calls and continued attempts to justify his behavior, I suspected he was too proud and too scared to take that path. The screenshot had done exactly what I'd intended. It had forced Derek's hand and started a chain of revelations that would expose the truth to everyone who'd been manipulated by his lies. There was no going back now. Derek was about to face the consequences of 3 years' worth of choices, and unlike his previous family crises, this was one problem he couldn't solve with my money. Saturday morning. 2 days after my screenshot message, I was reviewing my presentation notes for Grandpa's memorial when 3 sharp knocks echoed through my apartment. The kind of knocks that demanded immediate attention, that carried authority and barely controlled anger. I looked through the peephole and saw Derek standing in my hallway with Dad and Shannon flanked behind him like backup singers. Derek's face was flushed red, his jaw clenched with the kind of tension that made his neck veins visible. Dad looked uncomfortable and confused, holding a manila folder that probably contained Derek's carefully prepared talking points. Shannon kept glancing between Derek and the floor, her usual confidence replaced by nervous energy that suggested she'd finally started questioning her husband's version of events. I opened the door and stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. Derek pushed past me without invitation, his work boots tracking mud across my hardwood floors with deliberate disrespect. He positioned himself in the center of my living room, like he was claiming territory. His broad shoulders and construction worker build meant to intimidate in the confined space. "We need to talk about this financial terrorism you're pulling," Derek announced without preamble. "Dad has something to say to you." Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably, unfolding a piece of paper that was obviously scripted. His reading voice was stilted and formal, completely unlike his normal conversational tone. "Blair, your recent behavior regarding family financial arrangements shows concerning patterns of manipulation and vindictive control. Derek has explained how your success has created unrealistic expectations about family dynamics, and we believe professional counseling might help you develop healthier relationship boundaries." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Derek had convinced our father to stage an intervention about my mental health because I'd prevented him from stealing my money. The carefully clinical language was so unlike Dad's normal speech patterns that Derek might as well have been moving his mouth like a ventriloquist. "Dad, did Derek write that speech for you?" "Son, Derek's just trying to help us understand what's been happening with your attitude lately. He's been carrying a lot of responsibility for family coordination while you've been focused on your career success." The casual way Dad delivered Derek's lies, the complete acceptance of narratives he'd never questioned, hit me harder than any deliberate cruelty could have. Derek hadn't just manipulated me. He'd turned my own father into an unwitting spokesperson for fraud and character assassination. I walked to my kitchen table and retrieved the folder I'd prepared for exactly this moment. 3 years' worth of bank statements, transaction records, email communications, and timeline documentation that told the real story of Derek's systematic deception. "Dad, before we discuss my attitude problems, I'd like you to review some financial records." "Derek, I'm curious about your explanation for these numbers." I spread the documents across my coffee table like evidence in a courtroom, each page clearly labeled and cross-referenced. Dad leaned forward to examine the papers, while Derek's face went pale. Shannon moved closer, her expression shifting from nervous support to genuine alarm as she recognized bank account numbers and dollar amounts. "These are transfers from your business account to our family account." I explained to Dad, pointing to specific transactions. $4,200 for your truck repairs in September 2021. $8,900 for Mom's hospital bills in March 2022. $15,600 for Derek's business loan payments between June and December last year. Dad's face cycled through confusion, recognition, and dawning horror as he processed the information. Each transaction corresponded to a family crisis, where Derek had swooped in to save the day, taking credit for generosity funded by my bank account without anyone's knowledge. Derek told us these were loans from his business line of credit. Dad said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of betrayal. He said he was taking financial risks to help family during tough times. Derek never risked a penny of his own money. I continued pulling out additional documentation. Every family emergency, every generous gesture, every time he played the role of financially successful older brother, it was funded by automatic deposits from my business account. Shannon grabbed one of the bank statements with shaking hands, scanning the numbers with the expertise of someone who managed household finances. Her face crumpled as she recognized the truth. "Derek, you told me you'd borrowed against our house equity to fund the reunion. You said you were sacrificing our financial security to give the family a perfect celebration." Derek's composure finally cracked completely. His shoulders sagged, and the aggressive posture dissolved into defensive panic. "Everything I did was for this family. Blair was so successful, and the money was just sitting there. He didn't even miss it. I was solving problems and keeping everyone happy while he focused on his career." By lying to everyone about the source of the money. Dad's voice carried a note of anger I'd rarely heard before. By convincing us Blair had become selfish and arrogant while he was actually paying for everything. Derek's face twisted with a mixture of shame and defiance. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under. My business is hanging by a thread. My crew depends on me for their livelihoods, and everyone expects me to be the strong one who has everything figured out. I couldn't admit that my little brother who works on computers was more successful than me." The admission hung in the air like a confession at trial. Derek had finally revealed the psychological core of his manipulation, pure corrosive envy that had festered for years until it poisoned every family interaction. He couldn't bear being financially dependent on someone he'd always seen as weaker and less practical. "Derek," I said quietly, "if you needed help, why didn't you just ask? Why construct this elaborate deception instead of having an honest conversation?" "Because asking would have meant admitting I failed." Derek's voice broke slightly. "It would have meant acknowledging that everything I told myself about success and family hierarchy was wrong." Shannon stood up abruptly, her face pale with realized implications. "Derek, how much of our marriage has been funded by Blair's money? Our vacation to Florida last year, the new furniture for the living room, the down payment on your new truck." Derek couldn't meet her eyes. The silence was answer enough. Dad folded up his scripted speech and looked at Derek with an expression I'd never seen before. Disappointment mixed with genuine anger, the kind of anger that comes from realizing you've been made complicit in hurting someone you love. "Derek, you turned me into a weapon against my own son. You convinced me Blair had become someone I should be concerned about when the truth was the opposite. You made me doubt my own judgment about my boy's character." My phone buzzed with a call from Uncle Tom. When I answered, his voice was tight with controlled fury. "Blair, I need Derek to understand something very clearly. The extended family knows the truth now. We've been making calls all morning comparing stories, and the scope of his lies is breathtaking. He's not welcome at today's reunion until he makes full restitution and apologizes to every person he deceived." I put the call on speakerphone so everyone could hear Uncle Tom's words. Derek's face went white as he realized his manipulation had been exposed to the entire extended family network. "The reunion is in 4 hours," Uncle Tom continued. Blair's grandfather memorial presentation will proceed as originally planned. Derek's business success presentation has been canceled. And Derek, if you show up without a full confession and restitution plan, I'll personally escort you off the property. Derek slumped into my couch, the weight of consequences finally hitting him completely. 3 years of careful manipulation had collapsed in less than a week, leaving him exposed, isolated, and facing legal liability for financial fraud. But the confrontation had served its purpose. Dad understood the truth. Shannon understood her marriage was built on lies. Uncle Tom was protecting the reunion from further manipulation. Derek's house of cards had fallen, and this time, there was no one else's money to rebuild it with. The knock on my door had been meant to intimidate me into backing down. Instead, it had become Derek's confession, and the final step in exposing his deception to the people who mattered most. Derek had finally gotten the family confrontation he'd been avoiding, just not the way he'd planned. The silence in my living room stretched like a rubber band, ready to snap. Dad sat hunched forward, still holding Derek's scripted speech, looking like a man who discovered his entire understanding of his family was built on lies. Shannon kept staring at the bank statements, her lips moving slightly, as she calculated how much of their lifestyle had been subsidized by my money. Derek had collapsed into my couch, his face buried in his hands. That's when Dad did something that surprised everyone in the room. He stood up, slowly, walked over to Derek and grabbed him by the shoulders. "Look at me, son." Derek raised his head, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "Your grandfather fought in World War II. He earned a Purple Heart defending this country, came home, and spent 40 years working double shifts at the steel mill to support his family. He never once lied to get ahead. He never once took credit for another man's work. He never once betrayed the people who trusted him." Dad's voice was steady, but contained a fury I'd never heard before. "And you've dishonored everything he taught us about integrity and family loyalty." Derek flinched, like he'd been slapped. "Dad, I never meant for it to go this far. It started small, just borrowing from the account to cover cash flow problems, and then it snowballed." "No," Dad said firmly. "It started when you decided lying was easier than telling the truth. It started when you chose manipulation over honesty. It started when you decided your pride was worth more than your brother's trust." My phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. "Blair Harrison. This is Detective Patricia Williams with the Financial Crimes Division. I understand you may have information about unauthorized use of business accounts and identity theft." Derek's head snapped up, his eyes wide with terror. Detective Williams explained that Uncle Tom had contacted the police after discovering the scope of Derek's deception. Using someone else's business credentials for unauthorized contracts, collecting money under false pretenses, and accessing accounts without proper authorization constituted multiple felonies. "Detective Williams, I haven't decided whether to press charges yet. This is still a family matter we're trying to resolve." "Mr. Harrison, I appreciate family loyalty, but fraud is fraud regardless of relationships. We'd like to interview you this week about the financial discrepancies Uncle Tom reported. In the meantime, we'll be investigating the business identity theft allegations." After hanging up, Derek looked genuinely terrified for the first time since arriving at my apartment. "Blair, you can't let this become a criminal matter. Think about what it would do to Mom's heart condition. Think about Shannon and our mortgage payments. Think about my construction crew who depends on my business for their livelihoods." The manipulation was automatic, reflexive. Even facing potential criminal charges, Derek's first instinct was to use other people's vulnerabilities as leverage. He was literally asking me to protect him from the consequences of his actions by considering the impact on people he'd been exploiting for years. "Derek, Mom's heart condition has been aggravated by stress over finances that you created while stealing my money to solve them. Shannon's mortgage is at risk because you've been lying to her about your business income while using my funds to maintain a lifestyle you can't afford. Your construction crew's livelihoods are threatened Because you've been running your business using fraudulent credentials instead of building legitimate success. Shannon stood up abruptly. Derek, I need you to tell me the truth about something. When you showed me those contracts with the Reynolds family and the Johnson commercial project, did you use Blair's business name to get those jobs? Derek's silence was admission enough. Shannon's face went white as she realized the full implications. Derek, those are our biggest contracts this year. If the clients find out you misrepresented your credentials, they'll demand refunds and probably sue us. We could lose our house. Shannon, I was going to tell Blair about the contracts eventually. I was planning to offer him a partnership in the business once we got more established. I almost admired Derek's ability to reframe theft as a business opportunity, even while facing criminal investigation. He was still trying to position himself as someone with legitimate plans, rather than someone who'd committed fraud out of desperation and pride. Dad walked to my window and stared out at the street, his shoulders rigid with tension. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried absolute authority. Derek, you're going to do 3 things. First, you're going to call every person you lied to and tell them the complete truth. Second, you're going to liquidate whatever assets you have and begin paying restitution to Blair immediately. Third, you're going to get professional help for whatever psychological problems made you think this behavior was acceptable. Dad, if I admit everything publicly, my business will be destroyed. Shannon and I will lose everything. Son, your business was never real if it was built on lies and stolen credentials. Shannon's going to lose everything anyway when your clients discover the fraud. The only question is whether you face this with whatever dignity you have left, or whether you force Blair to pursue criminal charges that will destroy what's left of our family reputation. Shannon gathered up the bank statements and folded them into her purse. Derek, I can't be married to someone who's been lying to me about everything for 3 years. I'm going to my sister's house to think about whether I want to try to save this marriage or protect myself from your legal problems. She walked to my front door, then turned back one final time. Blair, I'm sorry about everything Derek did. You deserved so much better from your family. I hope someday you can forgive us for being too blind to see what was really happening. After Shannon left, Derek broke down completely. Real tears this time, not the manipulative displays he'd used during earlier conversations. The weight of losing his wife, his business reputation, his family standing, and potentially his freedom finally crushed through whatever psychological barriers had allowed him to justify his behavior for so long. Blair, I know you have every right to destroy me completely, but I'm asking you to remember that we're brothers. I'm asking you to remember the man I used to be before pride and financial pressure turned me into someone I don't recognize. For the first time since Sunday's dinner, I felt genuine sympathy for Derek. Not because his behavior was excusable, but because I could see the frightened, overwhelmed man hiding behind years of desperate deception. He'd dug himself into a hole so deep that climbing out seemed impossible, so he'd kept digging while convincing himself the bottom was actually the surface. Derek, I remember exactly who you used to be. You were the big brother who taught me how to throw a curveball and how to change a car tire. You were the one who stood up to Bobby Martinez when he was bullying me in 7th grade. You were someone I looked up to and admired. I paused, letting the words settle. That's what makes this betrayal so devastating. You didn't just steal my money. You destroyed my memory of who my brother was. Dad turned away from the window. Boys, we need to get to the reunion. Blair's got a presentation to give, and Derek's got some serious apologizing to do to people who've been worrying about him based on lies. The legal revelation had changed everything. Derek was no longer just facing family embarrassment. He was facing potential criminal charges that could destroy his life completely. But for the first time since this whole crisis began, he was also facing the truth about what his choices had cost him and everyone who loved him. The reunion was going to be the most difficult family gathering in Harrison family history, but it was also going to be the first honest family gathering we'd had in 3 years. Derek was about to discover whether his family's capacity for forgiveness was stronger than his capacity for self-destruction. The American Legion Hall in Millbrook had been transformed for our family reunion, with round tables draped in red, white, and blue tablecloths, and dozens of photographs chronicling 4 generations of Harrison family history. 63 relatives had gathered from across Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, making this the largest reunion in 15 years. The afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting everything in golden light that should have felt celebratory, but instead carried the tension of impending revelation. Uncle Tom stood at the entrance greeting family members, but his usual jovial warmth was replaced by grim determination. Word had spread through phone calls and text messages all morning. By the time Derek arrived with Dad, most of the extended family already knew some version of the truth about financial manipulation and identity theft. Derek walked through the hall, like a man heading to his own execution, his usual confident stride replaced by hesitant, shuffling steps. Conversations quieted as he passed, not from respect, but from the uncomfortable silence that surrounds someone whose reputation has been shattered beyond repair. I'd arrived early to set up my presentation about Grandpa's military service. The display included his Purple Heart photographs from his unit in France, letters he'd written home during the war, and interviews I'd conducted with 3 surviving veterans who'd served alongside him. The presentation represented months of research and preparation, but it also represented something deeper, a connection to family history that Derek had tried to steal, but never truly understood. Cousin Marcus approached me as I adjusted the microphone for my presentation. "Blair, Uncle Tom told us what Derek did. I can't believe he's been lying about you for so long. Sarah and I always wondered why you'd stopped calling, but Derek said you'd gotten too busy for family. We should have reached out directly instead of believing his stories." Similar conversations happened throughout the afternoon, as family members apologized for doubting me, shared their own memories of Derek's suspicious explanations, and expressed anger about being manipulated into worrying about my financial situation, while I was actually supporting everyone else. But the most meaningful conversation came with Aunt Linda, Grandpa's only surviving child, who'd driven 8 hours from Detroit to attend the reunion. "Blair, your grandfather would have been so proud of your presentation today. But more than that, he would have been proud of how you handled the situation with Derek. You could have destroyed him completely, but you chose justice over revenge. That takes more strength than most people understand." At 3 o'clock, Uncle Tom called the reunion to order. The hall fell silent as he addressed the assembled family with the kind of grave seriousness usually reserved for funerals. "Before we begin today's celebration, we need to address a serious matter that affects our entire family. Derek Harrison has been engaging in financial fraud and systematic deception that has damaged trust and hurt people we love. Derek, you have something to say to everyone here." Derek stood slowly, his face pale, and hands shaking as he faced the assembled family. For a moment, I thought he might run or collapse, but instead, he took a deep breath and began the most difficult speech of his life. "I need to confess something that will change how you think about me forever. For 3 years, I've been lying to all of you about Blair, about our family finances, and about my own character. I've been stealing money from Blair's business account while convincing you that he'd become arrogant and selfish. I've been taking credit for financial generosity that came from his bank account, not mine. I've been manipulating family relationships to hide my own business failures and personal insecurities." The confession lasted 20 minutes, as Derek detailed every lie, every manipulation, every instance of fraud he'd committed. He admitted to collecting money from relatives under false pretenses, using my business credentials for unauthorized contracts, and systematically isolating me from family while exploiting my financial support. When Derek finished speaking, the silence in the hall was deafening. Then, Uncle Tom began a slow, deliberate applause that was picked up by other family members until the entire room was clapping, not for Derek's confession, but for the courage it had taken to tell the truth. Derek broke down completely sobbing with the kind of raw emotion that comes from finally releasing years of accumulated guilt and shame. Dad walked over and embraced his older son, not in celebration, but in the kind of hug that acknowledges shared pain, while refusing to excuse destructive behavior. My presentation about Grandpa's military service followed Derek's confession, and the timing felt perfect. After hearing about betrayal and manipulation within our own family, the story of Grandpa's courage, integrity, and sacrifice reminded everyone what the Harrison family name was supposed to represent. I spoke about his service in the Battle of the Bulge, where he'd earned his Purple Heart, while helping evacuate wounded soldiers under enemy fire. I shared letters he'd written home expressing homesickness, but never complaining about his duty. I played recorded interviews with veterans who remembered him as someone who could be trusted absolutely, who never abandoned a friend, who always kept his word, no matter what it cost him. When the presentation ended, the entire family gave a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. But the applause wasn't just for Grandpa's memory. It was for the restoration of family values that Derek's behavior had temporarily overshadowed. The rest of the reunion proceeded with a healing energy that surprised everyone. Derek spent the afternoon personally apologizing to every family member he'd lied to, accepting responsibility without making excuses, and beginning the long process of rebuilding trust he'd shattered. Shannon arrived in the evening, having decided to work on their marriage, while Derek addressed his psychological and legal problems through professional help. Uncle Tom announced the establishment of the Harrison Family Integrity Fund, a transparent financial resource for family emergencies that would be managed by committee with full documentation and oversight. The fund would be seeded by Derek's restitution payments and maintained by voluntary family contributions, ensuring no one could ever again exploit family generosity for personal gain. 6 months later, Derek completed a financial fraud counseling program and began making monthly restitution payments from a job with a construction company that knew about his legal problems but valued his skills and commitment to rehabilitation. His own contracting business had failed, but he was slowly rebuilding his reputation through honest work and transparent behavior. Shannon remained married to Derek, but only after extensive couples counseling, and Derek's agreement to complete psychological treatment for the personality disorders that had enabled his manipulative behavior. Their relationship was different now, built on honesty, rather than the image management that had characterized their earlier marriage. Most importantly, Derek began attending weekly therapy sessions to address the psychological roots of his deceptive behavior. He discovered that his manipulation had stemmed from unresolved childhood feelings of inadequacy and a pathological need to be seen as the successful family leader, even when reality didn't support that image. The healing process wasn't quick or easy. Trust that's been systematically destroyed takes years to rebuild, and some family relationships never fully recovered from Derek's manipulation. But the reunion had accomplished something crucial. It had restored honesty to our family dynamics and established accountability systems that would prevent future manipulation. A year later, at our next family reunion, Derek stood before the assembled family again. This time, he wasn't confessing to fraud. He was sharing a progress report on his restitution payments, his psychological treatment, and his commitment to earning back the trust he'd destroyed. The applause he received was quieter, but more meaningful, acknowledging genuine change rather than dramatic confession. For my part, I learned valuable lessons about setting boundaries while maintaining compassion, about the difference between enabling and supporting, and about the strength that comes from standing up for yourself without becoming cruel in response to cruelty. The Harrison family emerged stronger from Derek's betrayal, not because we'd avoided consequences, but because we'd faced them together with honesty and commitment to real change. Derek learned that genuine respect comes from character rather than manipulation, that financial success means nothing without integrity, and that family loyalty requires truth-telling rather than comfortable lies. Our grandfather's Purple Heart sits in a place of honor at every family gathering, now reminding us that real courage means doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, even when it costs you something precious, even when people you love disappoint you in ways that break your heart. The family dinner where Derek announced I wasn't real family seems like a lifetime ago now. Today, I know exactly what real family means. People who tell you the truth, even when it hurts, who hold you accountable when you make mistakes, and who love you enough to help you become the person you're supposed to be, rather than enabling the person your worst impulses want you to become. Derek is my brother again, not because I forgot what he did, but because he did the hard work of earning back the right to be called family. That's a lesson worth more than all the money he stole, all the lies he told, and all the pain he caused while learning it. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals become the foundation for the strongest relationships, if everyone involved is willing to choose growth over pride, truth over comfort, and accountability over easy forgiveness. The Harrison family reunion taught us that real family isn't about blood or loyalty or shared history. Real family is about people who choose to love you enough to tell you the truth, hold you accountable for your actions, and help you become someone worthy of their trust and respect. That's a definition Derek understands now, and it's made all the difference in who he's becoming versus who he used to be. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted completely was manipulating you behind the scenes? How did you handle the betrayal while still maintaining your own integrity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear about your experiences with family dynamics and how you've dealt with difficult situations that required both justice and compassion. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others who might be dealing with similar family challenges. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and building stronger relationships through honesty and accountability. And please share this story with someone who might need to hear that it's possible to stand up for yourself while still choosing healing over revenge. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth and let the consequences teach the lessons that manipulation never could. Thank you for taking this emotional journey with me. I hope Derek's story reminds you that families can survive even the most devastating betrayals when everyone chooses growth over pride and accountability over comfortable lies. Until next time, remember that real strength comes from choosing integrity, even when it costs you something precious. Take care, and never forget that you deserve relationships built on honesty rather than manipulation.